in a smaller town in Maine, right on the coast. It's the kind of town where it seems like everyone knows everyone. It's pretty calm and predictable here, which is why what's been happening to me feels so out of place. It's been going on for about a month now, but it started a long time ago when I was a kid. I'm 37 now, but I still remember these recurring dreams I had when I was about 7 years old. I used to wake up in the middle of the night terrified because I was sure there was someone or something outside my bedroom window. My parents used to rush in and tell me it was okay, that it was just a nightmare, and I believed them, but these dreams weren't like normal nightmares. In these dreams, I'd be paralyzed and taken from my bed. There would be a blinding white light, and I'd find myself in what felt like some kind of sterile or medical room, but not like a hospital. It was horribly sterile and cold. I never knew how I got there, and I didn't know who or what was doing these weird things to me. There were always 2 or 3 of these beings, too. I call them beings because I could never completely see them. I just had the sense that they were there and could only ever make out an outline of them standing over me and doing things. But like any bad dream, I'd wake up and it would be over. At least that's what I thought. Flash forward 30 years. I'm now living in an older farmhouse on the outskirts of Belfast. It's such a cute house and exactly what I've always wanted. I love the small, quiet town. I love being surrounded by nature, and I'm close enough to the ocean that I can walk to the beach. I live with my dog Frank, I'm a big Sinatra fan, who usually sleeps at the foot of my bed. Life has been really good lately, but out of nowhere, those horrible dreams started happening again. It was early summer when I had the first one. I remember it was a warm night and I had the windows open. I was just starting to fall asleep when I felt this familiar, eerie sensation that I used to feel when I was younger. I know I'm starting to fall into a dream, but it doesn't feel like a dream, and I can't move or fully wake up. I feel like I'm in my room, but not really. It's hard to explain. I started to sense the same presence of something just outside my window. I couldn't move, and I felt like I was floating or lifting up and being pulled toward the window. There was the same bright light, and before I knew it, I was in that sterile room again, lying on a table. I can never fully see them, but there are always the same 2 or 3 beings around me. I should mention that nothing is painful, but I can feel them doing things. They never say a word or really even acknowledge me at all. I'm just there, and I can't do anything about it. When I woke up, my heart was pounding, and I was covered in sweat. Frank was barking too, which was not normal, and it freaked me out even more. I got out of bed to calm him down and noticed something so weird that it took my breath away. My bedroom window was closed. I couldn't be more certain that it was open when I went to bed, and the thought of it being closed now terrified me. I started running through different ways it could have somehow closed while I was asleep, but there is no way. I know for a fact it was open when I went to bed, and I know I didn't close it. These dreams kept coming every few nights over the following weeks and were always the same. The light, the weird beings that I can't really see, and the feeling of being taken to that god-awful room. And now every time I wake up, I think about that window closing the first night. The worst part about all of this is the sense of helplessness I have. I can't see these things that are taking me, but I know they're there, and I can't do anything about it. I can't even move or speak when it's happening. At this point, I was dreading bedtime every night, and I felt like I was losing my mind. One night, I mentally couldn't take it anymore and completely lost it. I was in the middle of another dream, back in that place, and I could feel them standing around me. I didn't know if they could hear me or if they even understood me, but I started crying. I couldn't move, but in my head, I was screaming and begging them to leave me alone and to stop coming for me. I don't know what made me do it. It was like something inside me just broke. I felt so small and powerless, but for the first time, I felt like one of them heard me. The last thing I remember is having a giant burst of panic-fueled energy, actually sitting up on the table and screaming at the top of my lungs. I woke up almost hyperventilating and with tears actually streaming down my face. My room was dead silent except for the sound of Frank panting at the foot of the bed, probably wondering what on earth was wrong with me. I must have startled him when I woke up so suddenly. My window was closed like I'd left it when I went to bed, and I realized that there was no way I could go back to sleep, so I just got up and made coffee. After that night, my dreams completely stopped, and I haven't had one since. Part of me still wants to believe they heard me begging them to stop and to leave me alone, but I'm still scared and always wondering if the dreams will start happening again. Every night I check the window, making sure it's locked, but I can't shake the feeling that they'll come back. Maybe soon, or maybe in another 30 years. I have no idea. All I know is that those dreams are too real. I can't explain it, but deep down, I feel like they weren't dreams at all. The memories of it feel like the memories of something that actually happened. I've thought about it so much, and as crazy as this sounds, I feel like I was chosen when I was young, and that I won't be able to get away from this happening to me again someday, and that scares me the most. My name is Tom, and I'm a fisherman in La Push, Washington. I've been here most of my life, aside from the few years I lived in Seattle when I was younger. La Push is a small coast town with a handful of shops, a restaurant, and a small harbor. Everyone is connected to the sea in one way or another, either through fishing or other work on the water. My family has been fishing these waters for generations, and it's all I've ever known. I've seen just about everything the ocean can throw at you: rough seas, good and bad fishing seasons, and crazy weather. But last summer I saw something that my crew and I won't ever forget. I was out in late August and I had my regular guys with me, Joe and Theo. We were fishing for rockfish and they liked deeper water, so we headed out around sunset to hit a few spots that had been good. It was a totally normal night, and the only thing I remember is the water being calm, almost no wind either. Around midnight, we were working our lines and keeping an eye on the gear when Joe, who was up at the bow, called out that he was seeing something in the water. I came out to check it out, and sure enough, there was a light that looked like it was sitting right on the surface of the water off to our starboard side. I slowed the boat down and moved a bit closer to see if we could get a better look. My first thought was that it could be some kind of reflection or lights from a small boat, but when we got closer to it, we could immediately tell the light was coming from underwater. It looked like it was coming from something solid, and I'm guessing about 15 feet below the surface. I started to wonder if it was a boat that had just gone down, and I was looking around in the water to see if there were any people. We got even closer, almost directly above it, and I could see the outline of something that had a long oval shape and was bigger than I originally thought, maybe the length of a school bus. It had light along the edges that were steady but moving around the outside, sort of in a slow rotation around the perimeter. The lights were steady and weren't flickering or pulsing, they just moved in a continuous path along the edge of this thing. They were all the same warm white color too. Whatever it wasn't moving away from us, it just sat there with the lights moving around the edges. This is when I started to think military or some kind of science or environmental study equipment, even a research sub, but there were no other boats around us. I cut the engine completely and let the boat drift. The three of us leaned over the edge, staring at it and asking each other what it was. It was hard to make out any detail because of the water. It was just a dark, solid shape with a thin light skimming along the edges. It didn't look like a submarine and seemed too flat for that. I've also been around some underwater research and rescue equipment over the years, but it didn't look like that either. I felt like it was checking us out actually, which was a little unnerving, especially if it was some kind of military operation. After a few minutes, it started to move toward our boat, slowly and going directly underneath us. We followed it across, moving to the other side to see where it was going. We looked down on that side of the boat and saw it again, just briefly and still about 15 feet down. But as soon as we could see the whole thing, it started to descend steadily. The lights got dimmer, and eventually it completely disappeared into the dark. I should also mention that we didn't hear anything. We were still drifting, so there weren't any other noises other than the ocean. I turned one of my spotlights on and was looking around for any other boats or signs of people out there, but didn't see a thing. Theo even yelled out a few times to see if anyone needed help. We sat out there for quite a while, watching the water and waiting for anything really, but that was it. Eventually we decided to call it a night, turned the engine back on and headed back to shore, definitely confused. On the way back, we were talking about it a lot and coming up with all kinds of ideas of what it could have been. At the top of the list was military, but there was also some talk of something beyond our technology. The next day, I got a hold of a friend of mine in the Coast Guard, someone who might know about any testing going on or submarine activity in the area. He looked into it and later told me there had been no reported activity at all. No research vessels either. Nothing that would explain what we saw. According to him, we should have been the only ones out there. So far, I don't have any explanation. I've been doing this for decades, and I've seen my share of strange things, but this one takes the cake. I've been a trucker for just over 30 years and was heading east on Highway 36 in Missouri after a quick stop in Chillicothe for a late dinner. I had just grabbed a bite to eat at a place I like to go when I come through town called Hicks. I think it's the only place still open that late at night. The plan was to continue driving through the night, stay on my route, and reach St. Louis by 5 a.m. I was about 20 minutes from the next town called Brookfield. The road was dark and straight, and it was partly overcast that night. I had a decent podcast on about World War II, but other than that, it was just another boring night at work. My clock had just hit 12:30 a.m. when I saw something unusual in the sky. I noticed a dark shape moving slowly about half a mile ahead of me, and I'd have to say about 500 feet off the ground. I slowed the truck down because I wasn't really sure what I was looking at. It wasn't moving very fast, but I could tell it was heading in a north to south direction. It looked like it'd be directly over the highway if it stayed on the same path. I eventually pulled over onto the shoulder, left the engine running, and hopped out of the cab. This thing was now only a few hundred yards from me and still at about the same height. I remember noticing how still the air was for a night where clouds had been rolling through, and I also smelled this distinct metallic smell. It was similar to the smell after it rains, but sharper than that. It wasn't a scent I'd ever smelled before. If I had to describe it, the words burned iron are about as close as I can get. It was everywhere in the air, and it seemed unnatural. Looking up at it, I was trying to make out a definite shape. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be, and the shape was difficult for me to see with it being so dark. Like I said, it could be my vision, but it looked like it was merging with the sky around it. It was huge, too. I'm thinking football field size at a minimum, and it didn't have any noticeable features whatsoever. I stood there and watched it go over the highway, wondering if I should hop on the radio to see if anyone else was seeing it. As it was going over the highway, I did notice a sound. It wasn't loud and sounded distant. Weirdly, the first thing that came into my head was muffled bees buzzing. It wasn't steady and seemed to go in and out and sort of oscillate. After a minute or two, and as this thing was now farther south of the highway, the buzzing shifted into this clicking noise. I know how weird that sounds, but it was a deep, rhythmic clicking that was happening in intervals. This part wasn't quiet at all. It echoed across the fields and had to have been heard by other people living out there if they were awake. I watched it as it continued to drift south, now moving a mile or so from me, and went directly into a patch of clouds. There was no sudden disappearance, no lights at all the entire time. It simply flew into the clouds at that slow pace until I couldn't see it anymore. It's not like I was the only one on the highway during all of this either. There were a handful of cars that passed by my truck in both directions while I was standing there, but they either didn't see it or just didn't stop like I did. Once it was gone, I got back in the truck and started down the highway again. The very first thing I did was grab my phone and called my wife. I told her every detail while it was still fresh in my mind, trying to describe exactly what I'd seen and heard, and told her about the weird smell in the air. She thinks what I saw was once in a lifetime and wishes she could have been with me. I still had some miles left to cover, and for the rest of my route, I found myself replaying the whole thing in my head over and over again. I couldn't even get back into my podcast because I just kept thinking about it. As hard as it can be sometimes, I love driving truck, and my night routes are especially nice because it's usually quiet and the traffic is better. I feel pretty lucky to have seen whatever I saw that night, and I'd be lying if I said I don't look up more often these days. I've even started listening to podcasts about sightings and UFO reports to see if anyone else describes something that looks like what I saw.